The story begins like a held breath before thunder, a hush pouring through courtyards and pillared halls. In that stillness, a mortal name is spoken as if it were a prayer. Psyche. She does not seem cut from clay or chisel. She walks, and the world tilts to keep her centered. When she passes, spice sellers forget their scales, priests lose their place in hymns, and doves pause above the harbor midwing. People say her face gathers dawn and keeps it. They swear her skin remembers summer, even in winter shade, and that her gaze is the slow unveiling of a shoreline at first light. Temples do not empty because mortals stop needing desire. They empty because desire appears to have stepped into the street wearing sandals. Maidens who once braided wreaths for the goddess now sketch Psyche's profile on wet clay, their hands trembling as if touching a forbidden surface. Young men lay figs and coins along the palace threshold, broken halves of small hearts resting in bowls. Psyche does not gather these tributes. She steps around them as one steps around shards of a mirror, careful not to bleed on the shapes others have made for her. Her sisters circle her radiance with talk, the way fishermen circle a silver shoal, hoping to net reassurance from the glitter. They love her, and they envy her, and both feelings bruise the mouth asked to hide them. Her father, a careful king, consults oracles with the patience of a man who suspects beauty can be an omen. He hears the same answer wearing different masks. When a mortal outshines a goddess, the sky leans down to correct the measure. He returns from the temple quieter, as though the air itself has warned him to walk softly in his own house. Meanwhile, the city trains itself to her presence. Market songs change key to match the pitch of her footsteps. Old women at fountains bless themselves when she passes, unsure whether the gesture is protection or apology. Lovers quarrel and later blame Psyche for the ache that remains, as if her existence has reset the standard for what a body should move and a voice should promise. The air near her seems unscented yet full. It is what the sea smells like before a storm, a clarity that is also a warning, the kind of brightness that teaches you to watch the horizon. The goddess hears. Of course she hears. She is the bright knife of pleasure, the ache after bliss, the sea foam crown on longing. She is not deaf to silence in her sanctuaries. Word reaches Aphrodite the way rhythm finds a dancer's heel, and jealousy rises like a tide that refuses the moon. She looks down from her honors, her girdle heavy with every sigh ever uttered, and sees priests sweeping empty porches, garlands browning beside dry libation bowls. She sees mortals lifting their faces toward a girl, and feels her throne tilt a fraction, almost imperceptibly, yet enough to sting. What does envy make? It makes resolve and plans and punishments, sweetly wrapped. It makes a vow spoken between teeth, a request for the service of a certain son whose arrows never miss.
Yet before command is shaped, another thing forms: attention. The divine gaze tightens its focus. and the story begins not with love, but with scrutiny. Psyche does not know she is being watched from above and from the interstices of shadow, the way a candle watches a room before it is lit. She only knows the odd pressure of being noticed by something that does not breathe. Because desire in the world is not only the clutching hand, it is also the hunger of gods for order, the appetite of fate for balance. A mortal cannot become a second altar without the first altar answering. The answer will not be plain. It will arrive braided into dreams, into missteps, into sweet invitations that are actually doors. But all of that lies ahead, curled like a fern within its own green promise. For now, there is only pressure, a narrative gathering itself the way clouds gather weight, darkening from suggestion into certainty. Psyche walks in gardens designed to flatter her and fails to be flattered. Flowers lean toward her as if plants too could learn taste, but she looks past their colors at the seam between earth and sky, wondering where rumor crosses into decree. She would like an ordinary life. Who believes her? With laughter in simple rooms and a husband skilled at mending small broken things. She knows her beauty the way a bell knows its sound, intimately and involuntarily. If she could lay it down like a cloak, she would, and walk for one day unremarked. At night, she dreams of water and of wings. In the dream, something unseen lifts the surface of a lake into a breathing shape, then erases it with a palm. She wakes with her heart raised and then released, unsure whether she has escaped danger or abandoned it. She tells no one. Sacred things wither when named too soon, and besides, the palace already echoes with opinions. The city has decided she must wed a prince, or perhaps a hero. Poems have begun to braid themselves around her name, and the bards, failing at discretion, perform prophecies disguised as songs. So her father returns to incense and lots. The answers fray at the edges, but hold in the middle. A marriage will come, but not one you would choose.
The bridegroom will be a power that wakes the oldest fear in men. The phrases arrive with ceremonial gravity, but they are only the echo of what envy has already sworn. The family prepares as families do when they cannot govern the future, by perfecting appearance. There are new tunics and quiet tears. There is laughter perforated by sighs. The palace becomes polished worry and patient dread. What of the goddess in her shell-bright palace? She does not rage openly. Rage is for those who have not mastered the theater of restraint. Aphrodite smiles with the softness of a blade's reflection and begins to hum a tune that remembers every broken-hearted vow ever spoken. Her attendants know the melody. It is the preface to assignment. Somewhere a quiver gleams. Somewhere a hand that once taught desire to be sweet flexes around the possibility of making it bitter. Somewhere, too, a pulse quickens for reasons that have not yet been named aloud. The city below ripens in waiting. There is a moment each late afternoon when sunlight turns honey on the stone and the world hangs between chapters. Psyche stands in that light and understands nothing except that the air holds her name, as if studying it for later use. A breeze comes inland from the sea, carrying salt and rumor. She closes her eyes and feels watched, then cherished, then warned, then watched again. When she opens them, everything stands where it stood. Only her certainty has shifted slightly on its hinge. This is how a myth begins, not with trumpets, but with imbalance, not with a kiss, but with a comparison, not with love, but with the architecture that will test it. Psyche is not guilty of anything except shining, and even that is not a virtue, but a voltage. Still, in the mathematics of gods, radiance must pay a price. The scales tilt, the sea inhales. A lamp somewhere in the unwritten future waits to be lit. If there is mercy in heaven, it will be late. If there is tenderness in the story, it will arrive disguised as trial. For now we stand at the lip of the tale and look down. We see the girl who does not yet know what the sky has decided.
Psyche was not merely a mortal girl of striking form. She was a presence that seemed to bend the very air around her. Those who beheld her often spoke later, not of her features in isolation, but of how time appeared to pause when her eyes lifted, how silence leaned forward when her lips parted to speak. She was innocence, threaded with an aura that drew longing from even the most disciplined hearts. Her beauty was not sharpened into arrogance, nor dulled into ignorance. It lingered in a fragile balance, like a candle's flame shielded by cupped hands. She did not seek worship, yet worship followed her, crowding doorsteps and temple gates, reshaping her life into an altar she never asked for. This contradiction of purity caught in the snare of desire made her more than a figure of admiration. She became the delicate storm around which the gods themselves would turn. Her hair fell like poured bronze, glimmering with hues that changed under shifting sun, strands catching fire at dawn and cooling to amber by twilight. Her hands were slender, untrained in labor, yet when she lifted them, the gesture carried a grace that suggested every movement was part of some forgotten dance. Her voice, when she spoke to servants or family, was a gentle current, brushing through listeners like water over stones. She carried fragility in her step, the soft uncertainty of one unaccustomed to being more than a daughter or sister. But it was precisely that fragility that magnified her magnetism. Men thought they glimpsed vulnerability and longed to protect her. Women saw a gentleness they wished to cradle. Psyche was mortal, but mortality in her seemed gilded, softened by something the earth alone could not provide. And yet, behind the veil of that radiance, there lived a quiet dissonance. For Psyche, her own beauty was a weight she could not set down. She sensed the restless gazes that clung to her as she crossed the courtyards, felt the hush that followed her footsteps, and knew that her very breath was not entirely hers. It is the curse of innocence to remain aware without knowing how to flee. Each prayer whispered in her direction, each garland laid before her door, was a reminder of how far she had drifted from the safe anonymity of being human. She was worshipped, and yet profoundly alone, her heart aching for something real, unmeasured, and tender. Into this mortal radiance stepped Eros, the god whom poets called Amor, the winged master of hidden hungers. If Psyche was daylight made flesh, Eros was twilight given form, a being both luminous and shadowed. His face bore the calm perfection of divinity, every line sculpted into inevitability. His body was lean and fluid, built like the very tension of a bowstring, ready to release either tenderness or ruin. He carried wings that unfurled in silence, not feathered in mere white, but shifting with the iridescence of doves, swans, and midnight moths. When those wings moved, the air bent as though desire itself had texture, brushing against the skin of any who stood near him. His eyes burned with the double fire of contradiction, loyal son of Aphrodite, servant to her command, yet restless with impulses that bent away from duty. He had spent eternities wounding others with longing, piercing mortals and gods alike until their hearts unraveled. Yet he himself had remained untouchable, tasting desire as one tastes smoke, present, intoxicating, but not truly consumed. Eros was sensual, secretive, cloaked in the mystery of one who knows the currents of every heart but reveals nothing of his own. He had lingered at the edges of many stories, his arrows drawing together heroes and lovers, his laughter stirring both joy and ruin. But in Psyche he found not just another target, not simply another mortal to be moved like a chess piece. He found something dangerously new, a mirror that returned his gaze not with fear, not with shallow adoration, but with a purity that unsettled him. If her innocence was a flame, his godhood was the moth drawn despite itself. And over them both, like a storm crowned in foam, stood Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, mother of Eros, arbiter of allure. Her throne was not merely in temples of marble, but in every glance exchanged between lovers, every sigh at the sight of another, every tear shed when desire turned cruel. She was elegance incarnate, the sway of silk against bare skin, the taste of salt on lips after a kiss. She was not a goddess of passive beauty, but of commanding radiance, her very presence pressing others into silence. Her laughter could intoxicate or wound, her anger could reshape destinies. To imagine Aphrodite is to imagine the sea at dawn, shimmering, endless, both inviting and perilous. Her hair cascaded like foam kissed by light. Her eyes gleamed with the dangerous clarity of emerald shallows hiding sharp rocks. Around her, attendants braided wreaths, polished mirrors, and carried perfumes distilled from petals that only bloom under moonlight. She was not simply admired, she was feared in her admiration. For to attract her gaze was to risk drowning in it.
Aphrodite bore within her both the grace of divinity and the venom of envy. Beauty was her crown and her weapon, her sacred possession and the symbol of her supremacy. So when whispers rose of a mortal maiden named Psyche, whose radiance drew worshippers from Aphrodite's altars, the goddess felt not merely insulted, but dethroned.
Her temples emptied, her sacrifices waned. The envy that stirred within her was not the envy of mortals, sharp and fleeting, but a cosmic force, wrath spun from the very marrow of her being. She would not tolerate the theft of even a breath of her dominion. Thus, the triad of this tale stood in place. Psyche, fragile yet magnetic; Eros, god of desire, torn between loyalty and longing; Aphrodite, jealous and resplendent, poised to strike. Around them clustered voices of the mortal world, Psyche's sisters, who envied and feared her in equal measure; her father, a king bewildered by divine decrees; oracles who whispered of fates too heavy to alter; servants who carried trays of offerings and rumors alike. These background figures were threads in the tapestry, weaving context, echoing tension, amplifying the central storm. Their words, their silences, their reactions deepened the gravity of Psyche's plight, making her isolation all the more profound. The tone of these portraits is not merely description, but sensation. To see Psyche is to feel innocence aching beneath worship. To meet Eros is to taste the dangerous sweetness of desire itself. To stand before Aphrodite is to tremble under the weight of divine beauty sharpened into weaponry. Each figure embodies not only a role in a story, but an aspect of passion, purity, hunger, envy. They are not flat characters, but living archetypes, their gestures and glances heavy with the poetry of fate. Imagine Psyche lowering her eyes as yet another garland is laid before her feet, her fingers brushing the petals as if they might burn. Imagine Eros in the shadow of a torchlit hall, testing the weight of an arrow whose target he already fears to strike. Imagine Aphrodite reclining on her sea-born throne, one finger circling the rim of a cup as she plots with the serenity of inevitability. Around them voices rise, sisters whispering jealous laments, priests reciting cryptic warnings, servants hurrying down corridors as if carrying secrets too heavy for their arms. Here, then, is the stage set, not with marble columns or painted scenery, but with the flesh, the longing, the envy, and the innocence of those who will carry this myth to its fevered climax. The storm is not yet broken, but its clouds have gathered. The portraits are drawn not in ink, but in desire. And under each image lies the promise: beauty will burn, love will wound, gods will rage, and mortals will learn what it means to be caught between fragility and eternity.
The command was simple, spoken in Aphrodite's silken cruelty. Her son was to make Psyche fall in love with ruin itself, to tether her radiant beauty to a monster's embrace so that her mortal worshippers would recoil and scatter. Eros had carried out countless decrees before, piercing hearts and weaving fates with the invisible thread of desire, never questioning the will that guided him. Yet when he descended with bow drawn and arrow poised, the air itself conspired against obedience. He approached the sleeping maiden, Psyche, her breath soft as the rhythm of waves upon sand. Her lips parted as though they whispered secrets into dreams. He leaned close to fulfill his duty, but the arrow's tip trembled in his grasp.
Her beauty, fragile and unguarded, was no echo of Aphrodite's polished grandeur. It was raw, mortal, heartbreakingly pure. In that moment, his own hand betrayed him. The arrow grazed his flesh, and the god of desire fell captive to the very fire he had so long commanded. Love bloomed not with thunder, but with a silent implosion, a collapsing inward of restraint. The son of Aphrodite, ever the puppeteer of passion, found himself tangled in the threads he had spun for others. No longer was Psyche a task or punishment. She became a hunger that unsettled eternity. He could not wound her with ruin, for he was already wounded by longing. Duty bent beneath desire, and the story's heart began to quicken. Meanwhile, Psyche's father, troubled by oracles that promised no mortal husband, led her to a cliff where fate demanded its sacrifice. She was dressed as a bride, yet her face was a mask of resignation. Around her, the city mourned as if she were already claimed by death. Yet the wind rose not with violence, but with strange gentleness, carrying her from stone precipices into unseen arms. It was not a beast that received her, but silence, an invisible current that bore her upward and downward, through air and distance, until her body came to rest in a meadow drenched with perfume. Before her eyes stretched a palace that seemed born of music rather than stone. Its columns gleamed like moonlight solidified, its doors opened without touch, its fountains sang with liquid crystal. Every surface radiated welcome, yet no host appeared. Servants without form tended to her needs, voices soft as the rustle of silk. She ate delicacies carried by unseen hands, bathed in waters that shimmered as if stars had fallen into them, and was led through chambers designed to overwhelm even a goddess with wonder.
Yet nightfall brought the truest wonder of all. In the darkness of her chamber, Psyche felt a presence beside her. A hand brushed her wrist, tentative yet burning, and lips pressed against hers with a devotion that carried both restraint and desperation. The lover spoke little, his voice low as wind through leaves, promising tenderness, vowing joy, swearing that only one condition bound their union: she must not seek to see his face. Desire was hers freely, but sight was forbidden. Thus began the days of secret bliss. Each evening brought her body into arms that worshipped her with touches both reverent and urgent. Her innocence, once a weight, became wings in the dark, teaching her to soar where she had only walked. She came to crave the approach of dusk, to tremble at the first brush of fingers along her skin, to surrender herself to a passion that seemed both infinite and perilously fragile. Yet each dawn he was gone, leaving only the echo of his warmth and the haunting strangeness of her solitude. Conflict ripened within her as surely as desire ripened in her veins. For Psyche's heart had never known such devotion, yet her mind trembled beneath the burden of secrecy. Who was her lover, this god or man, this presence that cherished her by night and abandoned her by day? Fear gnawed at the edges of her ecstasy.
What if the oracles spoke true, and she had been bound not to a savior, but to a beast cloaked in shadow? Her sisters' voices, when she confided in them, sharpened these doubts. They warned her that monsters, too, could whisper sweetly, that chains could feel like caresses, that her palace was nothing but a gilded trap. Their envy mingled with concern, weaving poison into her uncertainty. And yet each night dissolved fear into fire. His kisses spoke louder than suspicion. His embrace silenced every question. He adored her not as a prize, but as if she were air itself, essential, irreplaceable. Still, the veil between them, the secrecy of his form, became unbearable. Desire, once a balm, now birthed longing for truth. She yearned not only to feel his breath against her skin, but to see the face that breathed it. Love demanded sight as much as touch, and secrecy, no matter how sweet, began to feel like betrayal.
For Eros, too, the conflict deepened. He had sworn to protect her from his mother's wrath by hiding his identity. He feared that the revelation of his divinity would shatter their fragile union. He loved her too fiercely to risk losing her, yet loved her too honestly to keep deceiving her forever. In the darkness, as his lips traced her shoulder and his hands mapped the contours of her body, he waged an invisible war against time, against fate, against the inevitability of truth. Each moment of pleasure carried the echo of impending loss. Thus the palace became a theater of contradiction, halls echoing with laughter that concealed anxiety, chambers filled with passion tempered by dread. Psyche moved between ecstasy and fear, desire and doubt, trust and temptation. She had been carried to a heaven that might yet prove a disguised abyss, and in her chest two flames burned side by side, one of love, consuming and radiant, the other of fear, whispering that love without sight might be nothing more than illusion. This is the heart of their conflict, a god who could command every desire, yet found himself enslaved by one mortal girl, a mortal who longed for truth as much as for love, even at the risk of destroying both. Eros's arrows had wounded countless others, but now he was pierced by his own hand, undone by the innocence he had been sent to punish. Psyche, once worshipped unwillingly by mortals, now worshipped a hidden lover she could not see. The secrecy of their union, intoxicating at first, became the seed of its undoing. For secrecy and passion are siblings that cannot live together long. Every whispered vow, every hidden touch, every night of trembling ecstasy only sharpened her need to know. Desire clashed with fear. Secrecy wrestled against truth. Passion ached beside betrayal. The palace glowed with sensual delight, but within its radiance, shadows grew. And so the tale pressed forward, a taut string ready to snap. Psyche trembling between obedience and curiosity. Eros torn between love and concealment.
Aphrodite waiting with vengeance sharpened into patience. The stage was set for temptation to harden into decision, for longing to give way to defiance. The forbidden face, hidden in shadows, drew nearer with every heartbeat of suspicion. And in the charged silence between two lovers, fate itself held its breath, knowing that the moment of revelation would ignite both bliss and ruin.
The night of revelation did not arrive with thunder or decree, but with the soft rustling of doubt that had been growing inside Psyche's chest like a vine seeking light. For nights uncounted, she had surrendered herself to the arms of her hidden lover, melting into his touch, her body blossoming under caresses that seemed both tender and fierce. Yet each dawn she woke alone, staring at the silken sheets beside her, the memory of heat cooling into silence. Passion filled her nights, but questions haunted her days. And so, when her sisters came whispering of beasts cloaked in secrecy, of serpents who fatten prey with pleasure before striking, their words rooted themselves in soil already fertile with fear. That evening she lay in the vast bed of her radiant palace, her pulse thudding louder than the fountain outside. She waited until his breathing deepened beside her, slow and steady as waves against a shore. Then, with trembling fingers, she reached beneath the pillows, where she had hidden a lamp of oil and a small dagger, one for sight, one for defense. Her heart ached even as her hand closed around the handle, for she loved him, yet love without face felt like a shadow refusing to step into sun. She whispered an apology he could not hear, then rose on unsteady knees. The lamp's flame shuddered into life. Its glow spread like a secret too long withheld, first timid, then bold, illuminating the figure upon the bed. Psyche gasped, not from horror, but from rapture. There, stretched in sleep, was no monster but the god of desire himself. His body shone with the perfection of eternity, sculpted in flesh. Skin smooth as ivory, kissed by rose. Muscles poised like the architecture of grace. A chest rising and falling with divine rhythm. His hair, dark as midnight gilded by dawn, spilled across the pillow, catching the lamplight in glimmers of bronze and gold. His wings, folded at his sides, shimmered with colors that seemed stolen from the dawn sky, iridescent and trembling, as though even in slumber they remembered flight. Her eyes devoured him. Every line, every curve, every shadow and gleam was an answer to longing. Here was beauty that made her own seem pale. Here was the source of every shiver she had felt in the dark. She reached out, unable to resist, tracing the arch of his shoulder, the slope of his arm, the soft curve where breath lingered in his lips. To look upon him was to drown willingly, to taste divinity with her gaze.
Yet the ecstasy of revelation carried its shadow. For as she leaned closer, awash in awe, her hand shook and a drop of oil slipped from the lamp's edge. It fell with the weight of fate itself, landing upon his chest. He stirred, lashes fluttering open, and the moment shattered. His eyes burning with both love and sudden betrayal locked upon hers. The silence that followed was louder than thunder, thick with despair and unspoken words. Eros rose with the swiftness of flight, his wings flaring wide, filling the chamber with shimmering feathers and storming air. The dagger clattered from Psyche's hand, forgotten as she reached for him, pleading, sobbing, her body trembling between desire and terror. He looked at her not with anger, but with an anguish that pierced deeper than wrath. "You could not trust me," he whispered, voice breaking as though it carried centuries of sorrow. "You have destroyed us." The words carved themselves into her soul. She tried to explain, to tell him of doubt, of sister's poison, of her longing to see the face of the one she adored. But explanations wither when trust is broken. Love thrives on secrecy only until secrecy becomes betrayal. He stepped back, his wings rising like a barrier between them, the air thick with the scent of extinguished sweetness. For one aching moment he gazed at her, as though memorizing the lines of her face. Then, with a rush of feathers and despair, he was gone, vanishing into the night. The chamber, once so full of warmth and passion, collapsed into emptiness. The lamp still flickered in her hand, its flame mocking her with the truth it had given and the ruin it had wrought. She collapsed onto the bed, pressing her face against the sheets that still held his warmth, sobs tearing from her throat. Desire had brought her to heaven. Curiosity had cast her into exile. Where once she was cherished, she was now abandoned, left to grieve not only the loss of her lover, but the betrayal she herself had caused.
The palace, too, seemed to mourn. Its fountains ceased their song, its walls dimmed, its unseen servants faded. What had been paradise dissolved into silence, as though the entire dream had been spun from his love, and with his departure it unraveled into void. Psyche stumbled through corridors that grew cold around her, calling his name until her voice broke. No answer came. The god of desire had fled, and with him the heart of her world. This was the climax of her tale, the height of passion turned to despair. For in daring to unveil her beloved, Psyche had not only seen the divine beauty she craved, but also the fragility of trust. She had touched what mortals were never meant to touch, revealed what gods swore to conceal, and the price was exile from the arms that had once held her. Her body remembered his touch, even as her arms ached with emptiness. Her lips burned with the ghost of his kisses, her skin longed for the weight of his embrace. But now these memories were wounds, reminders of what she had broken. Her heart, torn between longing and regret, beat with the frantic rhythm of a bird trapped in a cage of its own making. Thus the lamp, symbol of sight and betrayal, remained in her trembling hand as the night stretched endless around her. Love had reached its fevered height in the unveiling of a god's beauty, only to collapse into ruin with a single drop of oil. Passion had turned breathless, tragic, and sharp, leaving Psyche alone in darkness, her body still trembling with the memory of pleasure, her soul consumed by despair. The myth itself shuddered, as if holding its breath. For love, once broken, does not vanish. It transforms, becoming trial, exile, punishment, and the faint hope of redemption. But in this moment, this climax, Psyche was not yet a heroine of trials. She was simply a woman undone by desire, crouched in the ruins of her bliss, reaching for wings that had already carried her away.
Psyche awoke into absence. The once living palace dissolved into nothing but silence and wind. Where walls had shimmered, only bare earth stretched, and where fountains had sung, only her sobs echoed. Her arms ached with emptiness, her lips burned with memory, her heart clutched at wings already gone. Love had lifted her into ecstasy, but now it cast her into the harsher realm of trial. For the god she had touched and betrayed was lost, and Aphrodite, scorned, enraged, merciless, had not finished shaping her punishment. What followed was no longer secret bliss, but a pilgrimage through pain, a devotion tested by fire and stone, a path where desire became endurance, where longing transformed into sacred perseverance. Word of her betrayal reached the goddess swiftly, borne not by rumor, but by the pull of fate itself. Aphrodite summoned Psyche into her radiant presence, the halls of her temple glittering like a cruel parody of the vanished palace. Here the goddess sat, enthroned in shells and silk, her beauty sharpened into a blade. Her laughter, though musical, was steeped in venom. "So," she purred, "the mortal who would rival me has lost her god. Shall we see if you are worthy to regain him?" The sentence was not execution, but labor. Impossible tasks, devised not to be completed, but to break body and spirit. Yet Psyche did not collapse. She bowed her head, trembling but unbroken, her heart fueled by devotion. Her love for Eros had become more than desire, more than passion. It had become a flame that could endure the storm, a hunger that refused to die even when stripped of pleasure. She accepted the tasks, each more impossible than the last, and stepped into the crucible where longing transformed into sacred perseverance. The first command was to sort a mountain of seeds: barley, millet, lentils, poppy, every grain known, into separate piles before dawn. Aphrodite's eyes glittered, expecting madness to consume the girl as she faced the endless task. But night brought unseen allies. Ants, countless and tireless, swarmed to her side. They moved like living rivers, dividing the grains with meticulous devotion, as though the earth itself answered Psyche's quiet suffering. When morning came, the task was done, and Aphrodite's smile thinned into rage.
Next came a more perilous trial: to gather golden fleece from rams fierce and violent, creatures whose horns split trees and whose hooves shook the ground. Psyche approached the riverbank where they grazed, terror choking her breath. To step among them was death. Yet the reeds, whispering in the wind, guided her. "Wait until they rest in the noonday heat," they murmured, "then gather the wool caught upon the branches." And so she did, plucking tufts of golden fleece, shining like molten sunlight, returning to the goddess with arms heavy but spirit intact. The trials continued, each one a mirror of suffering and endurance.
She was sent to fetch black water from the river Styx, whose currents were guarded by serpents and impossible cliffs. Her body trembled at the task, yet an eagle descended, radiant and strong, seizing the vessel from her hands. It soared to the river, braving the deathly spray, and returned with the water, as though the heavens themselves bent in small mercies toward her resilience. Finally, the most perilous command of all, to descend into the underworld and fetch a box of Persephone's beauty, sealed within darkness and guarded by death. No mortal returned from such a journey, yet Psyche, wounded by longing but fortified by devotion, walked the path downward. She carried coins for Charon, cakes for Cerberus, and humility for the Queen of Shadows. Persephone, moved by her suffering, granted the box freely. Psyche ascended again, trembling but alive, carrying within her hands both hope and danger. Through each task her body grew weary, her spirit scarred, but her resolve did not falter. What began as passion in the arms of a hidden god became endurance in the face of divine cruelty. Love, once indulgence, was now sacrifice. Each drop of sweat, each bruise upon her skin, each tear shed beneath the weight of impossible demands became an offering, sanctifying her devotion. She was no longer the fragile maiden worshipped unwillingly for her beauty. She was a woman who chose her suffering, who endured for the sake of love.
And yet even devotion carries temptation. When she held Persephone's box in her hands, Psyche's heart faltered. Was it not beauty itself that had cast her into despair? Would not greater beauty win back her lover, soothe his anger, prove her worthy of his embrace? Her fingers trembled, curiosity flaring one final time. She opened the box, seeking radiance, but found only a cloud of deathly sleep. It spilled over her like smoke, and she collapsed, breath stilled, body limp upon the earth. It was then that Eros, healed from his wound yet restless in longing, returned to her. His heart, though wounded by betrayal, could not bear the sight of her fallen. He gathered her into his arms, brushing the sleep from her lips with a kiss, awakening her with the same passion that had first bound them. Love, battered and tested, did not dissolve, but transformed, reborn in the crucible of trial and forgiveness. But the outcome was not merely the reunion of lovers. Aphrodite's fury had not vanished. It had only been tempered by witnessing Psyche's perseverance. Psyche had endured humiliation, fatigue, and despair, yet she had never surrendered her devotion. Each trial had been a crucible, each impossible task a shaping flame. She emerged from the ordeals not untouched, not unscarred, but refined. The mortal girl who had once trembled before desire became a woman tempered by trial, her courage intertwined with her longing, her body and soul strengthened by the fires she had passed. The goddess, observing this transformation, understood that beauty alone could no longer define the narrative. Devotion, endurance, and sacred perseverance had become the measures of worth. Love was no longer a fleeting pleasure, a stolen touch in darkness. It was a force demanding patience, courage, and sacrifice. Psyche had learned this intimately.
in the ache of every limb, the burn of every tear, the sting of betrayal, and the exhilaration of triumph. She had tasted the price of passion, and she was willing to pay it.
Thus, in the end, the lovers were reunited, but the reunion was neither simple nor effortless. Eros's embrace was tempered by admiration and awe, for he now saw Psyche not merely as a mortal of surpassing beauty, but as a partner forged in endurance, whose devotion had survived the tests of gods. Together, they moved beyond secrecy, beyond hidden chambers, into a love now sanctified by trials and scars alike. It was a love not merely of desire, but of shared strength, of trust rebuilt, of the understanding that passion demands both risk and courage. The themes of devotion and endurance shone like gold purified by fire. Passion, once a fever of the body, had become sacred, an unbreakable force that spanned not only desire, but sacrifice. Psyche's love had been tested, and through suffering it had been transformed. She had endured betrayal and trial, and she had emerged resilient, a soul that knew the depth of devotion and the cost of desire. In the outcome of her trials lies the heart of the myth's truth. Passion without endurance collapses, but love married to suffering becomes eternal. The cost of love is sacrifice, and Psyche paid it with every step, every task, every tear. And in that payment she gained more than the arms of her god. She gained a soul that knew the depth of devotion, a soul strong enough to walk beside desire without fear. Even after the trials were over, the story held its pulse. Psyche's body remembered the ache of each labor, the longing in each forbidden chamber, the tremor of touches that had been her solace and her challenge. Her spirit bore the scars of lessons learned, each one a reminder of the price demanded by love, each one a testament to her resilience. The mortal had become immortal in essence, shaped by endurance and the sacred pain of longing, fulfilled only through perseverance.
Psyche stood at the threshold of a world forever altered, her eyes wide with the awe of one who had walked the edge between mortal fragility and divine perfection. The trials that had once crushed her had become the pillars upon which her new existence rested. Each task, each temptation, each moment of despair had been a lesson in endurance, a shaping of the soul, a proving of love's resilience. She breathed in the air of immortality, yet it was neither cold nor distant. It was warm with longing fulfilled, vibrant with the pulse of a passion tempered and eternal. Her gaze met Eros, and in that silent communion, time itself seemed to halt. For in his eyes she no longer saw merely desire or secret longing, but reflection, a mirror of her courage, her vulnerability, her strength. Their union was no longer shadowed by secrecy or fear. The hidden palace, the stolen moments of ecstasy, the trembling anticipation of each night had been replaced by a light that touched every corner of existence. Psyche's mortal hands, once soft with innocence and uncertainty, now carried the power to shape her own fate.
to move within eternity as a partner, equal in devotion and spirit. Her beauty, which once was the source of envy and catastrophe, was now tempered by wisdom, illuminated by the glow of endurance and the depth of experience. Every curve, every glance, every movement spoke not merely of desire, but of understanding, of a love that had survived the storms of trial and emerged refined, sacred, and luminous. Eros, whose wings had once concealed him in shadow, now revealed himself fully, no longer bound by fear of divine reprisal or mortal hesitation. His touch was tender yet commanding, a reminder of the duality of passion and protection, of pleasure and reverence. Each embrace carried the weight of trials endured. Each kiss was a promise forged not in the immediacy of desire, but in the eternity of love proven through suffering. He had seen her falter. He had witnessed her doubt. He had watched her endure. And in that witnessing, his own divinity was reflected and humanized. The God who commanded longing had discovered through Psyche the depth of true devotion, the beauty of a mortal soul willing to brave every trial for love.
Aphrodite, watching from her throne of immortal elegance, did not frown. Her wrath had cooled into a knowing admiration. She recognized that Psyche's perseverance had elevated her from the realm of simple mortals into one where the divine and the human intertwined seamlessly. Beauty alone could command attention. Endurance alone could earn reverence. Psyche possessed both. The goddess's jealousy softened, replaced by the subtle acknowledgement that in love, even the divine could be taught humility. The lessons that had once been punishment had in the end transformed all who witnessed them, mortal and god alike, teacher and pupil, entwined in the timeless dance of desire and devotion. The palace, once a hidden realm of secret passion and perilous delight, now existed in a new dimension, a fusion of heaven and earth, desire and reverence, flesh and spirit. It shimmered not only with the radiance of gold and crystal, but with the quiet intensity of a love that had endured everything and emerged immortal. Every hall echoed with laughter and whispered affections. Every chamber resonated with warmth and devotion, and every corner bore witness to the union of two beings who had learned that passion is both trial and reward. Psyche and Eros moved within this space as equals, their love no longer fragile, their longing no longer dangerous, but expansive, sacred, and eternal. Psyche's mortal fragility had not been erased. It had been transformed. Where once she had trembled beneath the weight of desire and envy of gods, she now stood resilient, her vulnerability fused with strength, her innocence deepened by understanding. In her presence, desire was safe, not stifled, but exalted. Her body and soul were no longer merely objects of longing. They were participants in the symphony of divine passion, an instrument through which love could manifest in both ecstasy and transcendence. Eros, too, was transformed, for the god who had been the master of desire alone had discovered partnership, the joy of shared vulnerability, and the profound beauty of mortal courage.
Theirs was a union of paradoxes, mortal and immortal, fragility and power, secrecy and revelation, fear and trust. Psyche's journey had taught her that desire cannot exist without trials, that passion without endurance is fleeting, and that the heart's deepest longing is fulfilled not in ease, but in the confrontation with its own limits. Eros had learned that love is not dominion, but communion, that even gods must submit to the lessons of devotion and the exquisite vulnerability of trust. Together, they embodied the fusion of all opposites, a perfect balance of sensuality and spirit, of mortal tenderness and divine ecstasy. Time itself seemed to acknowledge the transformation. Days flowed without the heavy shadow of anticipation or dread, and nights unfolded without secrecy or fear. The stars above, once distant witnesses to the clandestine meetings and whispered touches, now shone in quiet celebration. The moonlight touched Psyche's face as she turned to Eros, revealing her beauty and strength in equal measure. And he responded not with dominance, but with reverent admiration. Their kisses, their embraces, and the gentle brushing of fingers spoke of a love elevated beyond the simple hunger of flesh, becoming instead an offering, a devotion, a sacred ritual in which both mortal and God discovered eternity. The story of Psyche and Eros thus became legend, whispered not only in temples and palaces, but in the quiet spaces of mortal hearts that sought to understand the weight and reward of true desire. Their tale carried the eternal lesson that passion, when tested and tempered by trial, transforms into something far greater than fleeting ecstasy. Desire becomes sacred when fused with endurance, and love becomes immortal when it survives both doubt and despair. Those who heard of Psyche's journey were haunted by the understanding that what is truly precious cannot be grasped without effort, and what is truly divine requires both courage and humility.
In reflection, Psyche's triumph was not simply the reclaiming of Eros, nor was it the reward of immortality alone. It was the acknowledgement that love's most profound expression is found in the balance of surrender and strength, of vulnerability and resilience, of desire and devotion. The mortal who had once trembled beneath the gaze of gods now walked among them, equal in spirit, tempered by trials, and radiant with the quiet fire of perseverance. Eros, in turn, discovered that divinity does not diminish in shared passion. It flourishes when partnered with trust and courage. Their union became a beacon, a whisper across eternity that the fusion of mortal and divine, of fragility and passion, produces a love that cannot be undone. The final reflection of the myth lingers in the breath between heartbeats, in the sigh of wind through a temple, in the glimmer of sunlight on a fountain that echoes their sacred embrace. True desire must confront trial. Passion must endure temptation. Love must risk loss. But when the journey is faced with courage and devotion, the reward transcends mortal comprehension. Psyche and Eros stand together, their bodies entwined, their hearts aligned, their souls lifted into a love that is at once sensual, eternal, and ineffably sacred. Mortals may falter, gods may tremble, but their story remains a testament to the power of endurance, the sanctity of trust, and the ultimate triumph of love that dares to face the fires of fate. Even now, long after the tale has been told and the palace gates have opened into eternity, the echo of their journey resonates. It speaks to all who seek desire without fear, to all who crave passion without relinquishing self, to all who understand that the path to transcendence is lined with trials, yet adorned with the beauty of triumph. Psyche's fragility became her strength. Eros's divinity became tender in reflection, and together they forged a love that no power, mortal or divine, could undo. It is a love both sensual and sacred, a love both mortal and eternal. And in its memory, every whispered touch, every longing glance, every sacrifice endured is immortalized. Thus ends the final reflection of the myth, a world in which desire faces its trials, passion tests the heart, and love, tempered by endurance, rises transcendent. Psyche and Eros are not simply lovers, they are a paradigm of devotion and trust, a living testament to the truth that the greatest ecstasy is born from courage, and the most enduring bond is forged through both fragility and divine fire. In them, mortal and God, flesh and spirit, longing and fulfillment exist together in perfect, eternal harmony.